Hello, good afternoon, lovely, lovely people. I want to take a few minutes to explore a couple of ideas, right? And I'll start off by telling a little story. And it's related to the COVID times, right? So lockdowns, vaccines, social pressure, political pressure, medical pressure, employment pressure, all that sort of stuff, family pressure. And the story involves myself speaking to another family member, okay? And this family member, from the get-go, was totally opposed to the idea of lockdowns anyway, and certainly the idea of taking a vaccine for COVID. And her explanation was very simple, right, but thought-provoking. And it was that there was periods where she questioned whether she should take it or not. And we've all probably been through this, right? Some people questioned it and mulled over it for longer periods than others, right? And maybe more deeply and morally than others did. And this person decided then at the end of this questioning that she would never take it, because for her to take the vaccine would be contrary to her belief that this was being pushed for nefarious reasons. And not only that, but that her reasoning for taking it would not be based on her own integrity and her own consciously assumed morality, right? It would be based on social, not approval, but social pressure and conformity. And her conclusion was that if she was to take the vaccine, knowing that it was contrary to her morality, she would be betraying herself. And this betrayal of herself, her own values, right, would lead to her becoming sick and possibly dying. Okay? That's an interesting take, right? And a lot of people, we've been contaminated with the idea of scientism, right? Or not even quote marks, but just scientism. Okay, that unless something is peer-reviewed and promoted by a scientific establishment, then it's just not true. Okay, unless it's been replicated over and over again, it's just not true. And there's some merit in that, right? But there's areas where that just does not apply. And in terms of dealing with individuals, human beings as we are, and the multitude of different variables that constitute each individual's life, you just can't get a controlled, replicated mirror image of the same circumstances, right, in different instances. You just can't. It's impossible, right? So there's certain things that will be beyond the scope of scientific, empirical study and research, right? And that's not based on the irrelevance of the ideas that are attached to that. It's based on the limitations that are involved in the scope of empirical study with the controlled replication, all that sort of stuff, right? There's certain things that tool, that apparatus, right, that mechanism just cannot factor in. There's a limitation involved in the scientific, empirical, replicated studies, all that sort of stuff. It's a limited perspective. So many people will look at this person's perspective and belief even as superstition, a possible self-fulfilling prophecy, and maybe paranoia, right? Grand. But if we are to factor in certain phenomena that have been well studied and widely accepted, right, we can categorize it as perhaps a nocebo or a placebo effect. And the idea of placebo is that based on your expectations of receiving medical treatment, the results around 30-35%, right, will be impacted based on your believed expectations of how that treatment will affect you, right? So if you believe that it's going to work and do positive things in terms of ameliorating some suffering, in about a third, 1 in 3 people will experience the desired expectations or the desired results, even if the medication you're given is just a sugar pill, right? So objectively, the sugar pill should not do anything in terms of healing a suffering. But because of your beliefs or your expectations on the pill you're about to take, that it will relieve suffering, it tends to do so at about a 30% clip, right? So what does that tell us? It tells us that what we believe about our interactions with the world can influence and have a direct impact on the physiological response we have to the action that we're after taking. So what you believe ends up coloring your body in a certain way. Okay? And this person's view was that if she was to take something that was contrary to her morality, or if she was to take it for reasons that were contrary to her morality, it would have such a negative effect on her physiology that it could possibly kill her. Now, if we're to step away from the scientific view of it, right, the materialist, physicalist perspective of that, we can go back to Irish mythology and we come across a word called a gesa, or a gasa, Geasa. And the idea of a gasa is that it was core values of an individual, right, that if they were to betray them, would be synonymous with their bringing death to them. That to betray their own integrity and their own individual moral code and value system would be tantamount to wishing death upon themselves, and that they would willingly accept that death as a result of betraying themselves. So this is a really, really ancient perspective that was embodied in this person, right, and articulated by this person. She knew nothing of this, of course, right, but you see the echoes of ancient times still coming out in the modern Irish person. Now, that's the individual story, you might say anecdotal story, right, aside. We're still left with the placebo idea, which is that your beliefs will manifest in your body either in health or in disease or illness. And I would encourage people to go and read up this stuff, right? Go and read examples of this and read the stories, right? Read the stories and begin to look at what is the likelihood of this being something else, right? And entertain yourself and educate yourself for yourself. So that leads then onto the COVID stuff, right? The pressures that were put on people, and explicitly stated by some politicians as well, that we were doing this in order for people to take the vaccine. So there's intent involved in this. Now, we were told endlessly that to take the vaccine, number one, it was safe and effective, ill-defined terms. And number two, that it would stop the spread of this to other people. So by you choosing individually to take this, you're helping other people. It sounds lovely. And if you couple that with the placebo idea, you would expect to see wide-ranging positive health benefits to what people had done, okay? Again, at about the 30% mark, whatever it is, right? Depending on the people's belief in what the suggestion that's been given to them. And again, variables. People are different. To what degree did you believe it? Did you pretend to believe it socially, but internally you did not really? You questioned it, right? That's not what we've seen, though. We've seen since those times, again, if we park the cause for it for a second, right? Because the causes could be many. And to highlight one does not mean to disregard the other, right? If we pause the cause for a second, we see following those years, and during them as well, right? So things like depression, substance abuse, violence even against other people, right? Abuse at home. These things all grew by magnitudes. Anxieties, all these sorts of things, all stuff that A disturbed mind, right? These things are symptoms of a disturbed mind. They're not separate, really. They're all sourced in the same dis-ease, right? An uncomfortableness with yourself and with your experience of your life and the environment which is around you, society, right? That's what these things are. They're symptomatic of a disturbance in you and a disturbance in your relationship to the life that is external to you, right? There's a melting of the two of them together, the subjective and the objective, right? The internal and the external. There's the middle of that then, the middle path where both those things meet is you, right? You, your individuality, your perception of experience and reality. We've seen cancers rise. We've seen, it's quoted, who knows the number, right? Because people aren't really being honest about the number. It's not being explored in an honest and transparent way, okay? There seems to be some sort of desire to avoid the question and avoid the investigation of the excess of deaths that are, again, empirically. How many funerals have you been at over the last couple of years? Has it been more than the average over the previous 10 years? Right? We see stories of young athletes dropping dead on pitches. Okay, well, what's going on there? And no, that has not always been the case. There was like a handful of these things that would have happened over my first few decades of life, and they were such unique stories that they were well known. I still remember the names of some of these athletes that dropped because it was so peculiar. Mark Vivian Foe being one of them, right? And he's still alive, but he dropped and nearly died in a football pitch. But we're seeing it so regularly now that it's become closer to normal than it would have been before, right? It's not so much peculiar as it once was. So what's going on there? And now I'll bring you back to the COVID period, right? So we were told all of this lovely sounding stuff that you're saving people's lives by making this choice and you're putting people at risk by making that choice. You decide, right? Coupled with that, we were given very, very confusing guidance by people, right? So on the one hand, I'll give a couple of examples, but there are many, and people feel free to throw them down. One of them is that in order to help the first line responders, ambulance drivers, medics, doctors, nurses, hospitals in general, in order to stop them from being overflooded and overcrowded, which we were told was happening, people dropping all over the place, and the intensive care units are busting at the seams, right? We're told this really, really hazardous and dangerous and scary situation, right? That's what we're told. And at the same time, we're seeing videos of nurses and doctors, firemen, Gardaí, all in the middle of this chaotic period where there's no space in the hospitals, no time to save people, no time to do the job diligently. We're then shown broadcast across the world, right? These videos of doctors and nurses dancing, synchronized dancing in hospitals that look empty. They look empty, right? So in order to synchronize a dance with 100 people, that takes many, many, many hours to do, right? It wasn't improvised, right? Like Grease or something like that, where they all just bust into song, right? This thing was choreographed. And this thing would have taken hours and hours and hours of these people's work time. They weren't doing it at home. They were using their work time, paid by the state, out of your tax money, right, to synchronize and choreograph a dance that they then reproduced for the world and showed you. So on the one hand, you're told that these people are worked to death and they're exhausted and that whatever they try, they just can't get ahead of the stuff. And on the other hand, this is what you're being told, right? So you're taking in the verbals, you're taking in the words, and the images that you're being given run totally contrary to what you're being told. And that is, these people have enough spare hours in the day, while being paid, to choreograph a dance amongst hundreds of people that they're all doing it together. So on the one hand, you're told these hospitals are busting at the seams, and then you're being shown visuals, right? You're being shown visuals that show these hospitals are bare empty. They're not rushed off their feet. They have enough time to dance. Madness. Conflicting messaging, okay? The second point I will make is that you're told you can't have big gatherings in restaurants, okay? You can't have big gatherings at home even. You can't have them anywhere. You just do what you're told. Get off the beaches. Stay at home. We were told that you can go into a restaurant, right? But you need to be masked up. When you're waiting for a table, you're a danger to other people unless you have a mask on, okay? But as soon as you sit down at that table and you eat a meal that has to be worth at least €9, once you sit down at that table, you're still in the same room and environment with other people, right? You can then take the mask off and you're not a danger. The virus just misses you. It's only looking for standing up people, okay? And look, many people questioned this at the time and said, look, what's going on here? Are they just trying to make allowances and give people some semblance of normality? Maybe, right? But this conflicting messaging, it creates what's called cognitive dissonance. And the idea of cognitive dissonance is that, or it is, when your mind is trying to take two conflicting messages and hold them as true simultaneously. There's a contradiction, right? Two antagonistic or contradictory ideas cannot be held to be true without creating a massive sense of stress in one's mind and in one's body, right? We've established that the mind influences the body. It's crazy that we're in a situation here as human beings where this mind-body connection is still being contested, right? Of course, how you think about yourself impacts how you feel about yourself. And how you feel about yourself is a purely physiological thing, right? In terms of sensational, physiological feelings of it, right? But the two of them are the same thing. You are your mind and body. You are a connection of the same thing. Both of them are you. You are the totality of them plus something else, right? And what cognitive dissonance does, when you're fed conflicting messaging and you're told, right, and people take the lead and they accept both these things are true. Virus won't get you when you're sitting down, but it'll get you when you're standing up. And when you're standing up, you need to be masked because you're a danger to other people. But when you're sitting down 2 feet away from where you were standing and you have your mask off, all of a sudden you're no danger to people, right? This destroys people's minds. Because you're going around, you are literally a walking contradiction at that time. As soon as you accept these two conflicting things, you are a walking contradiction. And this stuff has been studied, right? And there's some filthy, filthy studies that have gone on out of the public eye, right? And they've been made public. In America especially, right? You had, I think it's the Church Commission. I'm probably getting that wrong, but I think it's the Church Commission, right? Where they were looking at the activities of the CIA. And what they found was that there was psychiatric, if you want to call it that, right? There was experiments being done by psychiatrists. One of them, Ewan Cameron was his name, right? And he was doing it in Canada, I believe. And what he was investigating psychic driving, right? Which is how to wipe a person's mind clean. Just destroy mentally that person's existence or that person's remembrance of themselves. And he was suggesting, right? He was probably revealing the results of what he was doing to people. That sensory deprivation and feedback loops, audio loops of the same messaging over and over again, and conflicting ideas would destroy people's minds, right? It would destroy them. Nearly lobotomize them without the physical lobotomization, right? Just wipe their minds clean and destroy that individual. Some people recovered enough from these experiments to be able to point the finger and say, this is what was done to me. I never consented to this, as if you could consent to this thing, right? So this thing has long been studied. how to wipe a person's mind, how to destroy their reasoning capabilities. And not only does extended exposure to cognitive dissonance, right? And we all have a part to play in this as well, right? The more knowledge you take in, the better decisions you can make, okay? And the more honest you are with yourself, and aware with yourself to be able to recognize when you are in a state of cognitive dissonance, the better. But this stuff, it not only destroys people's reasoning capabilities, right? The ability to spot what is sensible and what makes sense from what is clearly nonsense, right? It also has a physiological impact. When you're under stress, your body releases, if you want to just break it down to the chemical part of it, right? It releases cortisol, which, when exposed to it for extended periods, if you're in a constant state of stress, worry, dread, helplessness, right, uncertainty, your body starts to break down, right? Like if you have your foot on the brake and the other foot on the accelerator at the same time, you'll eventually just destroy the car, right? Because you can't be doing two antagonistic things at once, right? You can, but there's a consequence to it, right? And that consequence is, number one, mentally, your reasoning capabilities are destroyed. You can't make sense of anything anymore. You just accept what's fed to you. And you can see that in people now, not questioning things, just going along with things, don't doubt anything, right? They can't make sense of things. People seem far more dull and dumb than they once did, right? People are like children going around now, with just waiting to be told what to do with certain things. So that's the mental effect of it, the cognitive effect of it. But the physiological effect and nervous system effect of it, this is studied as well, right? It can lead to cardiovascular issues with the heart. And we've been seeing so much of that, right? Of kids dropping with heart issues, right? And then you factor in on top of that the idea of being separated from your family, not having to talk to your grandparents through a glass window, not being able to feel their presence because there's bricks in the way, not being able to freely walk about your nation and your country, right? And visit nature, right? And just sit on a hill somewhere and just allow your thoughts to meander away from you and come back again, right? These things were all taken off the table. You were told you're not allowed to do them. These things, they seem trivial, right? But they're very humane. And we neglect to entertain the impact that these things have on a person physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever you want, right? In terms of health. Right, we know that being around people that you care about is good for you. We know that being out in nature kind of restores your nervous system to a degree, right? It balances you. We know that being free to express yourself naturally and spontaneously is not only is it good for you, but it's an expression of health, right? Where you can give yourself freely an expression and experience to the world, right? We know that these things are positive. So when all of those things are taken away from you and you're told you're not allowed to do them, what impact does that have on people in the immediacy and also long term, right? Not just cognitively, but physically as well. And in totality, it destroys people, it has killed people. And that's before you even introduce other variables like the vaccine, right? So prior to that, and I think there's a danger or maybe a risk of the vaccine being not just scapegoated, but being held up as the sole cause of excess mortality following those years. I hope that doesn't end up being the case. I absolutely wish that, yes, absolutely investigate it and let's take the truth for what it is. Let's see it for what it is. Whichever way the cards fall, let's accept the reality of what this thing is or was and is, right? And can do. But let's not also forget or minimize the impact or the effect that the psychological program in which government and media were engaged in had on people. Right? Let's not deny that. Let's factor that in. But in order to factor that in and take that seriously as I think it should be taken, we need to reevaluate how we understand psychology, which is what emphasis we place on the mind, on someone's beliefs, right? On someone's worldview, on their values, and the impact that that can have on a person's health when they are hindered from expressing themselves or engaging with their life in a way that is natural to them, or where they're convinced that two totally diverse or antagonistic things can be true at the same time. We need to reassess how we look at the value of belief and the value of individual integrity, moral integrity. These are all worthwhile conversations that I think we're in the kind of hangover period of now, but these things need to be gone back over and reassessed and reevaluated and reinvestigated, or just investigated for the first time, right? And it needs to be done rapidly. It needs to be done openly. And it needs to be done seriously. Because we cannot, as Irish people, have an atrocity, right? Another state-sponsored atrocity happen to Irish people, and it happened to a generation of Irish people, and just plod along after it as if it was no big deal. We can't allow that to happen again. We need to grab this thing, have a look at it, and accept whatever truth we can rinse out of it. And that's the best way we have of getting well, getting over these things, and of healing people. And also of assuring that these sorts of instances no longer happen and do not happen in the future again. It's only by learning the rotten, bitter lessons of life that you assure you don't engage in the same thing or get snagged in the same trap again. And that is how you hand lessons on to posterity. Right? That's how you strengthen your people.